Hey folks, I just want to remind you to like, share, and subscribe. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening to us right now on the podcast, make sure you hit that follow button and share with your friends. Let's start the show. Welcome to Thought You Woke No Speed Limit Podcast. I'm your host, Alvin. Today I'm going to talk about the 13th Amendment and some changes that are coming for the good in the future in Alabama, Tennessee, Vermont, Louisiana, and Oregon. So the reason why I'm bringing this up, these things will be on the ballot in November. On November 8th, you will actually see an amendment to change some things here in the 13th Amendment. If you're looking at the screen right now, if you're watching this, you'll see that I've highlighted a section of the 13th Amendment that says, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Now, if you know anything about the 13th Amendment, one thing you know is it was ratified on December 25th, 1865. So it was a Christmas gift, so to speak, to all the black people in America, that slavery was finally illegal, except for the punishment for a crime, which has not been duly defined or specifically decided on. So it says it gives Congress the power to enforce this article appropriately, right? So the question here is, what's a crime? Here's how that law became used, and people can call it a conspiracy or whatever, but we know the truth about what happened to black people after the end of slavery. They were free to a certain degree, but then they were subject to what we call Jim Crow laws. Now, one of those things that came through on the Jim Crow laws was this whole idea of that people are working or lazy, especially black men are lazy. They even made a whole film called Birth of the Nation where they showed black men as violent and lazy and all of those things. So they had this thing called vagrancy laws. Vagrancy law got people locked up. It started the chain gangs. Also, there were other laws that black people could violate. They can go to jail for them. Small things that caused people to go to jail constantly. And yes, there were murders and other things like that, but a lot of black murders and thefts and things like that. But if you're constantly being pushed down at the bottom of society, because Jim Crow pushed black people down to the bottom, it hurt them economically. And the only way they made money was among themselves. So a lot of black people did profit from this, but a lot of people suffered also. So because you're at the bottom of the social ring, a lot of times these are the people who act out. They end up in jail. So it brings up a constant generation after generation of people being in prisons, fathers in jail, and kids without kids being raised without their fathers because their fathers in jail. And they end up working in the fields and doing all those things like that. That was a constant threat. Now, as time went on, the laws started falling off. And of course, they ended most segregation in the 50s. And then came the Voting Rights Act. However, the prosecution of black men did not stop there. Folks like Nixon, Reagan, and even Clinton all were fighting the drug war. So they all came up with their own reasons why there was a problem with that. Reagan famously talked about welfare queens as being a problem in the country. Of course, Nixon said black people, are selling drugs and they're not smart, they're not intelligent, so on and so forth. So he started this whole war on drugs, and supposedly, according to some documentation from his administration, he actually put drugs on the streets to intentionally destroy, to keep the black people down and make sure more of them got incarcerated. If that's true. There are statements from people who worked in his administration that said that was true. Of course, then, like Reagan didn't do any better. He did pretty much the same thing, and the war on drugs kept on growing. The violence was still there. People were still going to jail. Then Clinton comes along with his 3 strikes rule that puts more and more people in jail. So since 1980, America has incarcerated people at a rate of 500%. We had the largest incarceration rate in the world at 500 500% increase. And as of 2018, per 100,000 people, we put 698 people in jail per 100,000 people. There are 2.3 million people imprisoned in the United States. Now, when you look at this chart, it's talking about NATO, of course, and showing all the NATO nations, and we by far outpace every NATO nation on the list. At 698, I think United Kingdom is 139, and some other NATO nations not included on this list that should be, but they aren't here. And then we can talk about Russia. Their rate is like 536. So we're close to these totalitarian states like China and Russia on our imprisonment rate. We are much higher than most countries in the world, than most of our civilized nations in the world, right? Or what we call civilized. Sorry, I don't want to say civilized because that's wrong. But most of our Western and our NATO allies. Our incarceration rate is way and above that. So what has changed since then? Nothing. Basically, more men are incarcerated now possibly than back during the old Jim Crow era. There's more black men in prison now. Black people make up the majority of the people who are arrested and put in jail in most states. And black people are still a minority. Like in Alabama, it's 27% of the population is African American. 56% of the prison population is African American. So that says a lot in a state the size of Alabama, even though, 4 million people, you got all black people incarcerated, so on and so forth. Black people also consistently has the highest unemployment rate, lack of lower education rates, poverty rate. They're a lower poverty rate than the average white person in the state of Alabama. Where the average white person in the state of Alabama family make $80,000 to $90,000 a year. The average black family makes $50,000 or less. And that is a sorry statistic, and that often leads to this: crime and poverty go hand in hand, right? Well, when we go back to thinking about the 13th Amendment and how that law works in this, and everybody said, well, criminals are criminals, they deserve to go to jail if they committed a crime. But a lot of people being locked up for petty crimes. Remember when I talked about the whole drug thing? A lot of people being locked up for petty crimes. And like I said, it's an alarming rate at which we incarcerate people. All men, United States wise, we're 1 in 9 men end up in jail, or most likely to be in prison. 1 in 17 white males, 1 in 3 black men, 1 in 6 Latino men are likely to be in prison. Look at the women's rate: 1 in 56. White women, 1 in 111, as opposed to black women, 1 in 18 and 1 in 45 for Latino women. These statistics say a whole lot about our country and about racism, about people being locked up, about a system that has consistently put people at the bottom of the rung, and how we need to fix that. Yet when we say this stuff, people are like, oh, be quiet. It's your responsibility because you've just been bad and you haven't been good. No, it's more than just our responsibility. White people have been able to build up the generational wealth that black people have not been able to build up. And it's obvious, and it's a telling story when you see this. Now, a majority of black people are not locked up in the United States. Like I said, 1 in 3. That means 2 out of 3, 2/3 of black people are still out there on the street having a normal life. But it's the fact that 1 out of 3 is even locked up that hurts us, because there's fewer of us. So it hurts our neighborhoods, it hurts our towns, it hurts our economy, it hurts our families, because when a man's locked up, or a woman, they're not taking care of their family. They're not doing their duty towards their family. So that hurts the family not having one of the parents. We know that single family homes are more likely to produce people who go to jail, more likely to produce poverty and all those things. But when we're locking people up, that's what we're doing. But we're doing it for a reason. We're doing it for profit. Notice how people were being locked up in the United States. Local jails, state prisons, juvenile, correctional facilities, immigration, all the others, 2.3 million people locked up. There's a lot of this involving private prisons who make about $3.9 billion a year. We spend $9.8 billion a year on prisons in the United States. Money going towards prisons. Not saying that there shouldn't be prisons. We know there are violent offenders. We know there are people that need to be locked up. But there are also a ton of non-violent offenders who are being locked up in these prisons. at a higher rate than they should be locked up. Or for minor violations, you had a gun, you didn't have a permit. There are people who get locked up for, oh, I was smoking marijuana. Oh, 3 strikes. That 3 strikes rule kicks in. You were smoking marijuana. You shouldn't have been smoking marijuana. You ain't selling it. You ain't doing nothing else. And that rule kicks in. Even though marijuana is becoming legal in the country, there's still a lot of places where it's illegal. And these are discretionary laws because that same cop could walk into a white party, fraternity party, and tell them, hey, just throw away the weed and you're good. We'll walk into a black fraternity party and arrest everybody in the room. Right? So these people end up in prison. What happens when they end up in prison? Look at this disparity. Look at it. The blue line, the dark blue line you see is black people in the United States. Again, they are a minority in the United States, but they make a majority of the prison populace. Look at that white line and look at the Latino line. Even Latinos are being arrested and put in jail more than white people. Everybody in this country suffers when we can't do the right things for people, when our society is not set up in a way that the only way we can fix the problem is to lock them up. Like I said, private prisons are a big business. They make tons of money off of people. That's over 4,000 businesses in the United States make a profit every year from the prison industry, where men work for, on average, 83 cents a day to $1 a day. And then half of that has to be gone back into their upkeep in the prison. So not only are they making money because they're making money from whoever they put these guys out to work. That's what the prison is. And we can talk about the whole school to prison pipeline. You're not putting enough money to fund schools like Alabama does, or any of these other states in the South, Mississippi. We know the education rate is bad there. Louisiana is bad there. Arkansas is bad there. It's a school to prison pipeline. We're creating prisons that we can feed into the prison industrial complex. So these private prisons have these people where they can go and work and say, oh, well, I know what a lot of y'all are saying right now. Well, why is it important that we stop making prisons do hard labor? That should. They're being punished. Well, you got to think about this. There was a place in Alabama called Russell Athletic. I think it was 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. The company completely laid off its regular employees because it could make it could make a profitable profit off of making military uniforms with prison labor. So people who were working get laid off. Just imagine how that hurts them. The economy of their families are hurt by the fact that now you've been laid off. Now there's a chance that their kids or somebody in their family ends up in the prison pipeline. It's a game. In the economic game, we want to put people in prison so then they go back and they drive the economy for a small group of people who are using them basically as slaves. That's what we're doing here. That's why I wanted to bring this up. It's important that we bring that up. The school to prison pipeline is a huge problem in the United States because you can tell when kids aren't being properly educated, they aren't getting the response from their teachers. The teachers aren't getting properly paid like they should. Those teachers go elsewhere. So then you lose good teachers because you can't pay them. You have school systems here that literally don't have the funds to pay their school teachers the proper they need to. So then these teachers go elsewhere. Oversized classrooms, all those things are issues. So kids get lost. Those kids that get lost, they end up in this system right here, and they end up in prison. So what, like I said, what do private prisons do with all these prisons they have? They put them to work. And you see here, they're putting people to work. That's why it's called that's why it's called what it's called. It's called the school to prison pipeline. They have you working on the chain gang, just like they did back in the day, except that was under Jim Crow law. Now they're getting away with it in private prisons so they can make a profit. Even in state prisons, they make a profit off of basically slave labor. And those guys right there at the top, in top right, they're in county jail. That means they may or may not be convicted. County jail is not the same as federal prison. A lot of times these are people waiting sentencing. And again, I said this is on the ballot in November. It's on the ballot in Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana, Oregon, and Vermont. They're changing the language and taking out slavery language in their constitution, which could end slave labor in prisons. You know, the federal government has already said they're shutting down private prisons. They're going to stop using private prisons because private prisons come with stupid contracts like we have to keep our prisons at 90% capacity. Alabama overdo everything here. Citations, overdue citations, overdue charging people, all those things. That's a popular thing here. People have monitors on their legs because they couldn't pay a ticket. People go to jail for hard labor for parking tickets. What kind of mess is that, right? They're going to jail. So these private prisons make $10 a day, or private organizations make $10 a day off of these ankle monitors, and somebody's paying this money out of their pocket that they don't have, most of the poor people, if they can't get into one of these expensive diversionary programs that cost $500 to $1,000. So if you can't get a diversionary program, you can't afford to get in one of those when you get charged with a crime, then they're putting an ankle monitor on that you're paying $10 a day for. And if they're not doing that, then they got you doing this, working on the chain gang. So we've got to change this in November. So this is the beginning of changing that. They're working on it nationally. It's a bipartisan effort because this is a Republican state. They're working on his Republican state in Louisiana. It's a Republican state in Tennessee, a majority Republican state. But this is a bipartisan effort to end this in those states, to end this. In Vermont and Oregon, they're trying to end it there. Hopefully, eventually, we'll get a federal law that will change the Constitution that will take that provision out because it's so broad. Anything it calls a crime that puts you in jail, that then puts you into the system where you are basically a slave. Now, the other thing they need to end is this, because the 14th Amendment, which is not on this ballot, but should be, is the 14th Amendment gives every person in America, regardless of race, religion, political preference, sexual orientation, any of those things, the right to vote. We should never have taken it from prisoners who are American citizens. They should still have the right to vote as far as I am concerned. People say, oh, well, the violent offenders don't need it. We shouldn't make them lose that right. There are rights you lose. You're in prison, you're put in prison. You know, we should do everything we can to create reform in prison. We should make sure if they're not educated, they were educating people that will get out, and that so they'll become better. If we have lifers in prison, you know, that story is a little different. But I do believe that if we have somebody that's going to be out of prison, that's going to be back on the street, instead of keeping them and locking them up with other criminals where they learn to be more criminal, let's educate them and change their lives so that they can become better citizens in the United States. But do not take away their right to vote. Like I said, what's important is November is that this initiative that's on the ballot. It's on the ballot in all your states. So it's important that November 8th you vote. If you're early voting right now, you should, in those states, if any of those states have early voting, you should be voting on this initiative. That should give you a reason to get to the polls and vote. Vote this law down so we can officially end slavery in the United States, in America, because slavery should no longer be an issue here at all. It shouldn't be. Vote. Vote, I say. Vote. You must vote. That's how we get this situation fixed. We vote. Voting is the way to do it. We vote. We fix the whole. We fix everything when we vote. You are the decision makers. Don't let anybody else tell you that you aren't. Vote, vote, vote. Voting matters. Your vote matters. It's important that you vote in November. And that is exactly where I'm going to end the show today. I hope y'all have a wonderful and peaceful day. I'm out because guess what? I do have a 9 to 5.